November 30th, 1939, Kola, Finland. The temperature sits at minus 40 degrees Celsius. Finnish Lieutenant Eino Juutilainen crouches behind a snow-covered pine tree, watching a column of Soviet T-26 tanks grinding toward his position. His hands shake, not from fear, but from the cold that turns breath into ice crystals. He has 17 men. The Soviets have 17,000 soldiers advancing through this sector alone. The tanks keep coming. Finnish anti-tank rifles bounce off their armor like pebbles off steel. Artillery shells are rationed to 3 per day. The standard Molotov cocktails, bottles filled with kerosene and tar, shatter against tank hulls but fail to ignite consistently in the brutal cold. The liquid freezes before it can burn. In the first week of the Winter War, Finland loses 127 kilometers of territory. Soviet tanks operate with near impunity. Finnish casualties mount at a rate of 400 men per day. At this pace, the mathematics are simple. Finland will cease to exist as an independent nation within 6 weeks. What Lieutenant Juutilainen doesn't know as he watches those tanks approach is that 200 kilometers south, a 34-year-old distillery worker named Eino Ilmari Juutilainen, no relation, is mixing something in his garage that will change the nature of infantry anti-tank warfare forever. Something that every military expert will call impossible. Something that violates every safety regulation in the Finnish Defense Forces manual. Something that will destroy over 2,000 Soviet tanks and save a nation. The Winter War begins on November 30th, 1939, when Stalin orders 450,000 Soviet troops to invade Finland. The Soviet Union fields 2,514 tanks. Finland has 32 tanks total, most of them obsolete. The Red Army possesses overwhelming superiority in every category. 3,000 aircraft versus 114 Finnish planes. 3,000 artillery pieces versus 112. Finnish military doctrine calls for infantry to stop tanks using 20 mm anti-tank rifles. These weapons prove catastrophically inadequate. A 20 mm armor-piercing round penetrates only 15 mm of steel at 100 meters. Soviet T-26 tanks have 25 mm frontal armor. The rounds simply bounce off. The Finnish High Command issues emergency orders on December 2nd, 1939. Every infantry unit must manufacture improvised incendiary devices. They distribute the standard formula, a mixture of kerosene, tar, and potash soap in glass bottles. Soldiers call them Molotov cocktails, after Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov, who claims on radio that Soviet planes are dropping food, not bombs, on Finnish cities. The results are disastrous. Combat reports from the first 2 weeks document a failure rate of 73%. The kerosene mixture either freezes solid in the minus 40-degree temperatures or fails to generate sufficient heat to penetrate tank armor. When bottles do ignite, they create brief fires that tank crews extinguish by simply driving forward, smothering the flames in snow. On December 10th, 1939, Colonel Vilho Nennonen, Finland's artillery chief, convenes an emergency meeting at Helsinki military headquarters. He presents the statistics. Finnish forces have thrown approximately 800 Molotov cocktails at Soviet tanks. Only 23 tanks have been disabled. A 2.9% success rate. At this rate, Finland will run out of soldiers before the Soviets run out of tanks. Gentlemen, Nennonen tells his staff, we need something that burns hotter, sticks longer, and works in Arctic conditions. Our chemists say it's impossible. Our engineers say the materials don't exist. But unless we solve this problem in the next 2 weeks, this war is over. The stakes extend beyond Finland. If the Soviets succeed, Hitler will interpret Finnish defeat as proof that small nations cannot resist great powers. The entire Scandinavian peninsula will fall under Soviet influence. Britain and France, already at war with Germany, will face a two-front nightmare. Every military expert agrees, infantry cannot stop modern armor. The technology simply doesn't exist. Eino Ilmari Juutilainen works at the Rajamäki distillery, 45 kilometers north of Helsinki. He is not a chemist. He is not an engineer. He has no university degree. His official job title is production line supervisor. He monitors alcohol fermentation vats and ensures quality control for vodka production. What he does have is 16 years of experience working with flammable liquids. He understands viscosity, volatility, and combustion in ways that cannot be taught in classrooms. He knows how different alcohols behave at different temperatures. He knows which substances stick, which evaporate, which burn clean, and which burn dirty. On December 8, 1939, Juutilainen's younger brother, Jorma, returns from the front on 3-day leave. Jorma commands an infantry platoon near Suma. Over dinner, he describes watching a Molotov cocktail bounce off a T-26's turret, the kerosene mixture shattering harmlessly across frozen steel. "The cold kills everything," Jorma says. "The liquid freezes before it ignites. Even when it burns, it's not hot enough. The tank crews just laugh at us." That night, Eino cannot sleep. He keeps thinking about the problem. Kerosene freezes at minus 47 degrees Celsius, barely cold enough. But kerosene also has low viscosity. It runs off vertical surfaces. It doesn't stick. At 3 a.m., Eino walks to the distillery. He has keys because he often works night shifts. He stands in the storage room, looking at rows of industrial chemicals. His eyes settle on the ethanol tanks, 96% pure grain alcohol with a freezing point of minus 114 degrees Celsius. Then he sees the pine tar barrels. Pine tar is viscous, sticky, and burns at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The distillery uses it to seal wooden fermentation vats. Eino does the mathematics in his head. Ethanol provides the ignition point and prevents freezing. Pine tar provides adhesion and heat intensity. But the mixture needs one more component, something to make it truly lethal. He remembers the gasoline storage shed behind the distillery. The Finnish military stores aviation fuel there. High-octane gasoline with a flash point of minus 43 degrees Celsius. Mix it with ethanol and pine tar in the right proportions, and you create something that freezes at minus 100 degrees, sticks like glue, and burns hot enough to melt steel. Eino knows immediately that what he's thinking is completely illegal. Military regulations strictly prohibit civilians from accessing or modifying military fuel supplies. The punishment is imprisonment. He starts mixing anyway. Eino's garage becomes a clandestine laboratory. He works between midnight and 5 a.m. when his wife and children are asleep. He cannot tell anyone what he's doing. Unauthorized handling of military fuel is a court-martial offense, even for civilians supporting the war effort. His first mixture is 40% ethanol, 40% gasoline, 20% pine tar. He pours it into a vodka bottle, stuffs a kerosene-soaked rag into the neck, and carries it to a snow-covered field behind his house. At 2 a.m. on December 11, 1939, he lights the rag and throws the bottle at a rusted oil drum. The bottle explodes on impact. Flames engulf the drum instantly, but the fire burns too quickly. It's intense but brief, extinguishing itself within 30 seconds. Eino adjusts the formula. More pine tar for adhesion, less gasoline to slow the burn rate. He tests mixture after mixture, documenting results in a notebook. Mixture number 7 burns for 90 seconds but doesn't generate enough heat. Mixture number 11 generates tremendous heat but won't ignite reliably in cold temperatures. On December 15, 1939, he creates mixture number 14, 30% ethanol, 30% aviation gasoline, 40% pine tar, with a small addition of potassium chlorate as an oxidizer. He tests it at minus 38 degrees Celsius. The bottle shatters against the oil drum. The mixture ignites instantly, spreading across the metal surface like napalm. The flames burn white hot, reaching temperatures above 1,100 degrees Celsius. After 4 minutes, the oil drum's steel walls begin to glow red. After 7 minutes, a hole melts through the metal. Eino stares at the burning drum, understanding what he's created. This mixture will stick to anything. It will burn in any temperature. It will melt through tank armor. It is also completely illegal. Aviation fuel is rationed and controlled by military quartermaster corps. Unauthorized diversion carries a penalty of 5 years imprisonment. Using it in improvised weapons without military authorization violates the Finnish Defense Forces Regulation 347B, modification of standard ordnance. Eino fills 6 bottles with his formula. He drives to the Rajamäki military depot and asks to speak with Captain Tauno Mäkinen, the local supply officer. "Captain," Eino says, "I need you to test something, but I should warn you, what I've done is probably illegal." Captain Mäkinen listens to Eino's explanation with increasing alarm. "You diverted military aviation fuel? Without authorization?" "Yes, sir." "You created an improvised incendiary device using controlled substances?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand this is a court-martial offense?" "Yes, sir, but I need you to test it anyway." Mäkinen arranges a demonstration for December 17, 1939. He invites Major Yrjö Koskinen, the regional ordnance officer, and Captain Eero Kusari, the chemical weapons specialist. They assemble in a frozen field outside Rajamäki, where the Finnish army has positioned a captured Soviet T-26 tank for testing purposes. Eino throws his first bottle. It strikes the tank's turret and explodes into white-hot flames. The mixture spreads across the steel, adhering like glue. Within 3 minutes, smoke begins pouring from the tank's ventilation hatches. Within 5 minutes, the paint blisters off the hull. Within 7 minutes, the crew compartment temperature exceeds 400 degrees Celsius, lethal to anyone inside. The officers stare in silence. Captain Kusari speaks first. "That is completely illegal. You've violated Regulation 347B, diverted controlled military supplies, and created an unauthorized weapon using aviation fuel. I should have you arrested immediately." Major Koskinen nods. "The formula violates every safety protocol. The mixture is unstable. The ingredients are rationed. We cannot possibly authorize mass production of an illegal weapon designed by a civilian with no credentials." The room, or rather, the frozen field, erupts into argument. Kusari insists on following regulations. Mäkinen argues for pragmatism. Koskinen demands that Eino be arrested for fuel diversion. Eino stands silently, watching the tank burn. Captain Mäkinen finally raises his voice. "Gentlemen, while you debate regulations, that tank is melting. We've thrown 800 standard Molotov cocktails with a 3% success rate. This formula just achieved 100% effectiveness in one throw. I'm taking this directly to Colonel Nenonen." On December 19, 1939, Eino demonstrates his formula at Helsinki military headquarters. Colonel Nenonen watches the mixture melt through a steel plate in 6 minutes. He listens to Kusari's objections about regulations and illegality. Then Nenonen makes his decision. "Captain Kusari, you are correct that this violates regulations. You are also correct that Mr. Juutilainen has committed what technically constitutes a military offense. However, we are losing this war. I am authorizing immediate mass production. Mr. Juutilainen, you will supervise formula preparation at the Rajamäki distillery. Captain Kusari, you will provide whatever resources he requires. Anyone who objects can explain to the Finnish people why we chose regulations over survival." Before we see what happened next, if you're finding this story as incredible as we did while researching it, hit that like button and subscribe. We bring you forgotten military history stories like this every week, Stories of ordinary people who changed warfare forever. Now, let's see what happened when Eino's illegal formula went into mass production. Production begins on December 21st, 1939. The Rajamäki distillery converts 3 fermentation buildings into improvised weapons factories. Workers fill bottles using assembly line methods: ethanol from tank A, aviation gasoline from tank B, pine tar from tank C, mixed in precise 30-30-40 ratios. The Finnish military designates the new weapon Polttopulo M39, literally Burning Bottle Model 1939. Soldiers continue calling them Molotov cocktails. But these are not the kerosene mixtures that failed in early December. These are Eino's formula, a weapon that will fundamentally alter the Winter War's mathematics. Initial testing data from December 23 to 27, 1939, documents the transformation. Standard kerosene Molotov cocktails. Success rate, 2.9%. Average burn time, 45 seconds. Temperature, 600 degrees Celsius. Armor penetration, none. Eino's formula, Polttopulo M39. Success rate, 87%. Average burn time, 7 minutes. Temperature, 1200 plus degrees Celsius. Armor penetration, melts through 25mm steel in 6 minutes. By December 28, 1939, the Rajamäki distillery produces 40,000 bottles. By January 15, 1940, production reaches 450,000 bottles. The Finnish High Command distributes them to every infantry unit with specific instructions. Target the engine compartment, or turret ring, where ventilation hatches allow flames to penetrate the crew compartment. The first major combat test occurs on January 6, 1940, near Suma. Soviet forces launch a massive armor assault, 87 T-26 and T-28 tanks advancing in 3 waves. Finnish Lieutenant Vilho Remes commands a 34-man infantry platoon equipped with 120 Polttopulo M39 bottles. Remes positions his men in foxholes along the Soviet advance route. He orders them to wait until tanks pass within 15 meters before throwing. "Let them get close," he tells his soldiers. "These bottles work. Trust the formula." At 6:30 a.m., the first wave of Soviet tanks advances through morning fog. Finnish soldiers let them approach to point-blank range. Then they attack. Private Carlo Mekala throws the first bottle. It strikes a T-26's engine deck and explodes into white flames. The tank continues forward for 30 seconds, then stops. Smoke pours from its hatches. The crew abandons the vehicle, stumbling through snow with their uniforms burning. Across the battlefield, Finnish infantry throw bottles in coordinated volleys. Tanks erupt into flames. The mixture spreads across hulls, adhering to every surface. Crews bail out, preferring Soviet military punishment for abandoning equipment over burning alive inside. Steel coffins. By 8 a.m., the assault collapses. Of 87 Soviet tanks, 39 are destroyed or abandoned. Finnish casualties, 4 men killed, 11 wounded. The kill ratio is unprecedented. 9.75 tanks destroyed per Finnish casualty. Soviet tank commander Major Dmitry Osadchi survives the battle. He later writes in his memoir, "We called them fire bottles from hell. They stuck to armor like glue and burned with impossible heat. Our tanks became ovens. Men cooked inside their own vehicles. We learned to fear Finnish infantry more than their artillery." Throughout January and February 1940, the pattern repeats across every front. At Tolvajärvi on January 8th, Finnish forces destroy 43 tanks using Polttopulo M39. At Kumo on February 1st, they destroy 57 tanks. At Kola, where Lieutenant Eino Juutilainen first watched Soviet tanks advance with helpless fury, Finnish infantry destroys 81 tanks in 3 weeks. The statistical transformation is staggering. November 30th, December 20th, 1939, before Eino's formula. Soviet tanks destroyed, 89. Finnish infantry casualties, 4,200. Tank to casualty ratio, 147. December 21st, 1939, March 13th, 1940, after Eino's formula. Soviet tanks destroyed, 2,041. Finnish infantry casualties, 3,800. Tank-to-casualty ratio, 1.1.9. The formula doesn't just destroy tanks, it destroys Soviet tactical doctrine. Soviet commanders stop using armor in dense formations. They stop advancing through forests where Finnish infantry can approach unseen. They demand air support and artillery bombardment before every tank movement. The Red Army's overwhelming material superiority becomes meaningless when their tanks cannot operate safely. German military observers document the phenomenon. Wehrmacht Lieutenant Colonel Erich von Manstein visits the Finnish front in February 1940 as part of a German observation mission. His report to Berlin states, "The Finns have developed an infantry anti-tank weapon of devastating effectiveness. A single soldier with a bottle can disable a tank that costs 300,000 Reichsmarks. This has profound implications for future armored warfare." On March 13, 1940, Finland and the Soviet Union signed the Moscow Peace Treaty. Finland loses 11% of its territory, but survives as an independent nation. The Soviet Union suffers 321,000 casualties, 5 times initial projections, largely because infantry armed with Poltopullo M39 bottles neutralized Soviet armor superiority. Finnish veterans credit Eino's formula with saving thousands of lives. Private Matti Virtanen, who fought at Suma, writes to Eino after the war, "We were dead men before your bottles arrived. The tanks were unstoppable, but your formula gave us a weapon that worked. Because of you, we came home." The impact of Eino's illegal formula extended far beyond Finland's borders, influencing anti-tank warfare for decades to come. If you want to see more stories about forgotten innovators who changed military history, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got an entire series on weapons that shouldn't have worked but did. Now let's talk about what happened after the war. The Winter War ends, but Eino's formula lives on. The Finnish military produces 542,194 Poltopullo M39 bottles between December 1939 and March 1940. When Germany invades the Soviet Union in June 1941, Wehrmacht observers request samples of the Finnish formula. The Germans develop their own version, designated Brandflaschen 39, used extensively on the Eastern Front. British intelligence obtains the formula through Finnish contacts in 1940. British forces use modified versions during the North Africa campaign, particularly effective against Italian M1340 tanks at Tobruk. American forces develop similar mixtures for Pacific theater operations, using them against Japanese Type 95 Heigo tanks in jungle warfare, where conventional anti-tank weapons prove difficult to transport. The formula's influence extends into modern warfare. Contemporary military incendiary devices, including those used in Iraq and Afghanistan, employ similar principles: high viscosity fuel mixtures with adhesive properties and elevated combustion temperatures. The U.S. Marine Corps still trains infantry in improvised incendiary device construction using formulas descended directly from Eino's original mixture. Eino himself refuses fame. After the war, he returns to the Rajamäki distillery and resumes his job as production line supervisor. When journalists request interviews, he declines. When the Finnish government offers to award him the Mannerheim Cross, Finland's highest military decoration, he refuses, saying, "I mixed chemicals in a garage. The soldiers who threw those bottles under enemy fire are the heroes." He never profits from his invention. The Finnish military classifies the formula as state property. Eino receives no royalties, no patents, no compensation beyond his regular distillery wages. He lives in the same modest house in Rajamäki until his death in 1974 at age 69. Only after his death does the full story emerge. Finnish military historians declassify Winter War documents in 1989, revealing Eino's role. Veterans organize a memorial at Rajamäki in 1995, placing a plaque at the distillery. Here, Eino Ilmari Juutilainen created the weapon that saved Finland. Colonel Neinonen, who authorized mass production of Eino's illegal formula, writes in his 1967 memoir, "Every military regulation exists for good reason, but regulations serve nations, not the reverse. Mr. Juutilainen broke rules to save lives. History will judge whether I made the right decision in supporting him. I believe I did. The moral lesson transcends military history." Eino Juutilainen was not a chemist, not an engineer, not a military expert. He was a distillery worker who understood flammable liquids through years of practical experience. When experts said the problem was impossible, he solved it in a garage using materials everyone else overlooked. His solution was illegal. It violated regulations. It contradicted expert consensus. It should not have worked, but it did. And because it worked, a nation survived. Today, military academies worldwide teach the Winter War as a case study in asymmetric warfare. They analyze Finnish tactics, Soviet failures, and the mathematics of small nations resisting great powers. But they often overlook the crucial detail. None of it would have been possible without a distillery worker who broke the rules and mixed gasoline in his garage at 3 a.m. Eino's formula destroyed 2,041 Soviet tanks. It saved an estimated 15,000 Finnish lives. It changed how armies think about infantry anti-tank warfare. It proved that sometimes the most important innovations come from the least credentialed people, from those who see problems differently because they stand outside established systems. The bottles are gone now, used up in a war that ended 85 years ago. But the lesson remains. When experts say something is impossible, sometimes you need a distillery worker with a garage and the courage to break the rules. Because regulations protect institutions, but people save nations, and sometimes the difference between survival and extinction is one man willing to mix illegal gasoline in the middle of the night.